Hey everyone, good evening. I'm Carrie Obrey, one of the directors of Heartland, the trade show for independent booksellers. We're in for a treat tonight as we take a break from this country's debates to experience the life of Dolly Parton as seen through the eyes of an author we know and love. While we can't promise you a fly won't land on anyone's head, I'm pretty sure we can promise you a good time talking about this fantastic book. Before we begin, I'd like to ask everyone to take a moment to register for next week's celebration of the Heartland Booksellers Award, featuring an all-star cast: Isaac Fitzgerald, one of our booksellers, Ida Cutler, and Hanif Adurakib. The registration link is going to be posted in the chat field. For the first time in the history of our awards, we're announcing the winners live, and it's going to be a blast. But tonight, we have Danny Caine in the house. He is the owner of Raven Bookstore in Lawrence, Kansas, which I'm pretty sure is Sarah Smarsh's local, as well as Watermark in Wichita, Kansas. Danny and Sarah make a great team, which you'll see today. Please chat away in the field on the far right of your screen. When you have a question to pose, add it to the question field. You can vote on your favorite questions to move them up and down the ranking. This is a book club, so we hope you've poured yourself a drink and are eager to chat about She Come By It Natural. Please click on the button below to request a final copy of the book, which includes a Dolly for President pin, which I'm sporting today. Thank you, Scribner, and thank you, Simon & Schuster, for being fabulous partners. Please talk about this book with your family and friends to thank them for this evening. And now, please take it away, Danny.
Thanks, Carrie. I'm so excited for this. I'm so glad everybody is here. We at the Raven adore Sarah Smarsh, and I can't wait for this conversation tonight. I had a really wonderful time reading this book and preparing for this. But first, a little bit about Sarah. Sarah Smarsh is a journalist whose reporting and work has appeared in too many places to count, including The Guardian and the New York Times. We at the Raven have known Sarah since way back when with her one of her early books that happened in Kansas, Remarkable Events That Shaped History. But most of you know her as being the author of Heartland, a memoir of working hard and being broke in the richest country on earth, a moving and important memoir about class and place that was a finalist for the National Book Award and won the Midwest Booksellers' Choice Award at the Heartland Fall Forum last year. Sarah is now the author of She Come By It Natural, Dolly Parton and the Women Who Lived Her Songs. It comes out next Tuesday. It is fantastic, and we're going to be talking about it all night. Please welcome Sarah Smarsh. While we're waiting for Sarah to appear, I just will reemphasize that please do ask questions. I have some questions for Sarah. We're going to start off talking between us, but I really would love this to be interactive. You've got questions about Dolly, questions about Kansas, questions about feminism and class in America. Tonight is a great time to ask one of the foremost experts on all of those things.
Where is she?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
You're
on screen.
Yeah. This might be my virtual events curse. I'm sorry, everybody. Sarah, we can start talking if you. Oh, there she is. Hey, okay. It's good
Hi,
to
everybody.
see you again.
Good to see you, Danny. Good to see all of you. And quickly, let me say, I have in my hands my treasured trophy, the 2019 Midwest Booksellers Choice Award, which is usually in my office. And I love you guys. Thanks for having me.
That's so great. We're so happy to have you. All right. I think we should just get into it. Let's talk about Dolly in the new book.
Let's do it.
You know, in the past 4 or 5 years, I think it seems like there's been something of a renaissance and a shift in how people talk about Dolly Parton. And it's much more common to take her very seriously as an important American musician and an artist and songwriter. And to me, one of the first signals that that was happening was the series of essays you wrote in 2016 that ended up becoming this book. I don't know if people were talking about it beforehand, but that's the first I heard of it. So you, in my mind, are at the forefront of this re-examining of Dolly Parton and her role in the American firmament. So why don't you just tell us about the origin of the book? Why Dolly? Why 4 long essays? Why did you start this project?
Well, I appreciate the cred that you're sort of offering in terms of that kind of national cultural discussion that we seem to be having somehow about her. The way that the sort of genesis of the writing project for me was in 2016, and I was actually under contract with Scribner at the time for Heartland, which I had been toiling on for many years and trying to get an agent and published for a long time. And then I sort of had in 2015, my writer's dream comes true, and I am on deadline for Heartland. And then a magazine that I've followed for years as a country music aficionado called No Depression, which is a very fine but kind of small readership niche publication about that genre, advertised a fellowship, their first ever, funded by their underwriting foundation, for a writer to spend an entire year looking at some topic regarding the intersection of Americana or roots music and broader society and culture. And that year I had been thinking about Dolly Parton because 2016 was, of course, a pivotal election year. And you'll remember, and this has faded to some extent, but in 2016, suddenly there were all these headlines about rural white working class people or white working poor people from a particular space and demographic. And you all know from Heartland that I hail from that same place and class and people. Yet the sort of tropes and stereotypes about it that I was seeing in all of these political headlines, while certain, I don't deny the truth of it, that bigotry and nastiness, which was presenting itself as related to the 2016 election, certainly exist, but it's hardly the whole of the story. And simultaneously, Dolly Parton had a new album and was touring with this big arena tour for the first time in many years. And I thought, wow, like I remember this moment. I took out my print New York Times. I still read print newspapers, and I had the opinion section open to like a 2-page spread. And just because I'm a nerd, I took out this was months before the election. It would have been that summer of 16. I had like a pink highlighter, and I just highlighted everywhere that Trump's name appeared in that 2-page spread. And my intention was so that I could count the number of times that his name appeared. Because to my mind, that for him, regardless of what happened, that was like mission accomplished. And when I held it up, and this wasn't my intention, but it had created this like visual pox on the newspaper. There are all these like pink dots. So what was going on in my mind, and there was, the sexism was rampant with Hillary Clinton being, of course, the Democratic challenger or candidate rather. And I just thought like, wow, Dolly Parton is like the antidote to whatever that poison is in terms of what my home kind of has to offer. I'm not, of course, from Appalachia, but this concept of the white working class and specifically of rural America. So I applied for that fellowship. I was very fortunate to get it. And then I was like, oh shit, I have to write that while I'm writing Heartland. And I did. And it came out in print only. So it was a pretty small readership, but very much a labor of love that I'm sure glad I did.
So it's interesting that the book is so framed in 2016, and here we are in the full swing of election season in 2020, a year that's in some ways similar and in some ways quite different. So how, through the lens of Dolly, is 2020 different? Is 2016 how is the picture of Dolly Parton 2020 different or similar to the picture of Dolly Parton 2016?
So the way that I would answer this question actually just changed a couple of months ago, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So one of the conceits of the book, or one of my sort of driving arguments, is that Dolly Parton embodies an an organic feminism that I recognize among the working class women who raised me. What I mean by organic is they didn't get a chance to go to college. They didn't study feminist theory. They were not subscribing to Ms. Magazine. They a lot of the more academic language surrounding that movement would be very foreign to them, and yet they embody the tenets of feminism in their day-to-day lives in many ways, some of which are documented in Heartland, I think, not in an overt way, but so Dolly Parton has for many decades been a figure who she's universally beloved precisely because of that sort of walking the walk of whether it's about Christianity. She's very open about her religion, but yet it's not like in an off-putting way that I personally find Nashville to sometimes espouse. There's sort of like a quiet strength in her, the way that she carries her values. She didn't, shy away from projects that might be politicized. She's sort of famously been, a vocal advocate for the LGBTQ community. She received death threats a few years ago for writing a song for a movie called Trans America about transgender people, in which she compares their experience to the transformation on the crucifixion. So like, she's not a woman, and you can go back to her early songwriting when she's talking about sexism and calling out the patriarchy, basically. She's not one who shies away from bold statements, but she is one who shies away from politics. And I think there are some class-related reasons for that. But the Me Too movement, which it was sort of the dawn of that movement when I was writing this book, and she never made any sort of vocal statement in support of it. Now, would that mean that she doesn't support it? No, that's just so. But what's different about 2020, I think, is that the crises that we are experiencing as a society and as a culture are so extreme that in a Billboard magazine cover story this past August, I think it was their September issue, she made a very, very clear, direct statement in support of Black Lives Matter. I believe the quote was something along the lines of like, "Of course Black Lives Matter. Do you think our lily white asses are the only ones who do?" But what I realized was, for her, that even yet was not necessarily a political statement. It was more of a moral statement, which I think, depending on your relationship to politics, I happen to be of the mind, that everything is politics in a sense. But for her, I guess what I'm saying is, in 2020, we reached such a breaking point in regard to right and wrong, democracy and fascism and so on, that even Dolly Parton is like, I'm going to come out and say this because we need to get clear on this.
Well, she famously, perhaps notoriously, has resisted the label feminist for decades, and touching on the book's feminist themes. How does she do it? How does she maintain such a beloved reputation without it seems like such a slippery thing, and I am having a really hard time thinking of anybody else who's managed to pull it off. It managed to be this beloved by such a broad range of communities that are seemingly at odds with each other. So how does she do it?
For sure. Well, it occurs to me when you mention her fandom that is diverse in many ways. In politics, you would call that a broad coalition. Mm-hmm. She's like built the broadest coalition. Yeah. And I think that the reason then that she can, for all of her own reasons, forego embracing a term like feminism, at least in the way that she has been defining it, is because for so long she has established, like, we know what she stands for. her first ever movie role, and presumably she had many to choose from in 1980, was of course 9 to 5, which is one like a quintessential feminist moment in American popular culture. And go on down the list. She chose roles that were not necessarily overt feminist statements, but were about gender and feminism very specifically all the same. Her songwriting, has long been about the struggles and triumphs of women. So I think that this moment where we're in this sort of like moment where you can get dragged on Twitter for not saying the right thing or not saying anything and so on. If she were like a 28-year-old artist, it probably wouldn't hold up as well. But the fact that we know her and she has established what she stands for, she's kind of like, I don't have to say nothing because I already said it. I guess I already showed it.
I want to pivot to the book itself. She Come By It Natural in a beautiful new hardcover. I don't know. I'm a cover design nerd, and you can see it's got the foil stamp on the
Isn't
cover.
it pretty?
Which they did a really great job with this. Before I say anything else, you can click the button at the bottom of the screen that says request a copy of the book and get a copy of the book sent to you with one of the great buttons that neither Sarah nor I have. Sarah never got any buttons. All the Raven booksellers took them before I had a chance to get my own, which is fine. They're cool buttons. I'm sure I'll get one someday, maybe. But this is kind of a book selling question, but I'm interested to hear your take. This is not a biography of Dolly Parton. It is not necessarily a book only about music. Where would you shelf? What section would you put She Come By It Natural in?
Wow. It's kind of amazing that I haven't thought of that yet. I will say, maybe this will help us think it through. When I was writing it, my intention, Heartland, actually, there were a lot of discussions at Scribner about like how do we package this? What do we call it? The original subtitle for Heartland was A Daughter of the Working Class Reconciles an American Divide. And they were like, we need to have memoir in the subtitle. And I was like, well, I'm not even sure that this is a memoir. I mean, it's a hybrid of so many different forms. But what drives it, of course, is the personal narrative, and they were right. But similarly, just as I used my family story, I hope as Heartland it's not just even about me in a classic memoir sense in terms of my experience of the world. I extensively interviewed generations of my family to also kind of compile their perspectives, and so I was hoping to use our family story as a springboard to a discussion about class in America. Similarly, with this writing that is now in book form, She Come By It Natural, I wasn't setting out, as you say, to write a biography of Dolly Parton by any means, and I don't think it reads that way, but rather to kind of use her life and career as a springboard to talking about the intersection of gender and class as it relates to this current moment. And so yeah, I definitely wouldn't put it in biography. I would say maybe like social issues. History might be a stretch. But you all are the experts on that. Hopefully, my little bit on how the book came to be will help you navigate it. Yeah, biography I would definitely cross out.
Well, it's interesting. I think Carrie or whoever's in the Heartland account commented the table in the front of the store, which is definitely where it's going to go for now.
That's what I should have said. That's what I should have said.
We have we're lucky enough to have the cop out of just putting it in the Kansas section because everybody adores you as one of our Kansas authors. But I think there is a really interesting shift in music writing. There are people doing really interesting music writing that is about music, but more. I'm thinking of Hanif Abdurraqib in his books, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, and Go Ahead in the Rain Notes on a Tribe Called Quest, in a really similar way as using a single artist as a springboard into much bigger issues. Do you think so? It's interesting to hear you draw the connection between Heartland and using your family as a springboard into bigger issues of class and politics, and She Come By It Natural, you're using Dolly Parton as a springboard to talk about gender and class. Is that your signature author move, would you say, is starting with the subject and finding the class and political undercurrents to it?
Not intentionally so, but it does seem to be presenting over and over, doesn't it? And also, in my journalism, in essay form and reportage, I was trained to, for, of all people, a memoirist to say this. I was trained very rigorously in a very fine journalism school to never use the first person. And in my pursuit of, my intention in becoming a journalist was always had to do with civic well-being and democracy, being even in politics, being a government watchdog. But when I started kind of letting a little bit of my own testimony bleed into some of my reportage in a more creative essay form of nonfiction, gosh, a whole bunch more people started caring about the things that I was covering. And so while I still consider that sort of quote unquote hard news to be an important form, this sort of taking what I, as a more literary person would call the metaphor of the real world to explore some broader issue, turns out to be what I was meant for.
Mm-hmm. So you've got your, and we'll get back to Dolly in a second, I promise, but I think this begs the question. You've got your family, and you've got Dolly Parton, both as springboards into issues of class and politics in America. What other things strike you or interest you as possible springboards to exploring the underpinnings of what's going on in America today?
Well, this is like, I have not shared this anywhere publicly, but what I'm working on right now, I'm just going to say like very vaguely, it's really about the intersection of class and race, which felt like the right space for me to be responsibly participating in this moment as a writer. And the springboard, as you say, and as I've said, to that discussion is a sporting event. Actually, I'm actually kind of like I've been a big sports fan. I'm also kind of a former athlete in some ways, and we see that that idea came about several years ago, actually. But we're now seeing, just as you cited, some great examples of music writing that are talking about like what's really going on at a deeper cultural level with music. We're seeing those same sorts of things happening in sports right now. Mm-hmm. So I think the reason maybe that I'm drawn to these sorts of topics in a journalistic sense, and then also as a writer, is because they are, I hesitate to use the word accessible when I think in mm-hmm. class terms, because I think that there's a little bit of condescension wrapped into that. But all the same, Dolly Parton and baseball were aspects of my working poor mm-hmm. upbringing. And they are sort of familiar texts in a sense to people who weren't as privileged as myself to go to university and graduate school and beyond. And, things that I remember, I'm talking for a long time. I'll end on this note. I remember being in, I was fortunate to do my MFA at Columbia, which is a pretty, a well-regarded program at an Ivy League university. And I'm like this kid, not so long off the farm. And I was writing an essay that had to do with a movie I'd just seen. And one of my workshop peers referred to it as banal. And I was like, kind of like how Dolly, people would say, this woman in her holler that she looked up to, they said, don't look at her, she's trash. She was like, when I grow up, that's what I want to be, trash. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like when that workshop peer said that, and I could just feel like this kind of nastiness in her comment. Yeah. I was like, that's what I'm going to keep writing, banal stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I started laughing as soon as I heard that. Just having, as a veteran of writing workshops, that's just such a horrible critique,
Yeah.
and hurtful. But I love the work you're doing. I'm very excited about already just hearing vague notes of this new project. It sounds great, and I and many readers appreciate where you're going with your journalism and your writing and your analysis. It's really important stuff, and not that many people are talking about it. So please keep going. So back to the book. You already brought up this quote, but to me, this is the heart of the book. That Dolly embodies an overlooked, unnamed sort of feminism I recognize in the hard luck women who raised me. Can you say a little bit more about what that feminism looks like and what you mean by overlooked, unnamed feminism that's embodied by Dolly Parton?
Sure. So, the most obvious, raison d'etre to even be discussing that idea is that there are a whole lot of women who didn't get any credit for what they contributed to women's progress. And, and those sorts of class divides and movements are inevitable in a society structured the way that ours is. And even today, you've got the which I admire greatly, but as I write in the book, you can just about bet that the women that you see wearing the knitted pussy hats are probably at least they may well be very hardworking and they may come from very humble origins, but something about they had the agency and the economic resources and the capital of some sort to be at a march when some other woman was taking care of their children or working in a factory and so on. And those are the women who raised me. So it feels quite personal to me that, and I think the reason I'm kind of, there's a little bit of a parallel here, I think, to what I saw a lot of my journalistic commentary in the last few years. I'm really hard on the left, and in particular, members of the media who would self-identify as liberal. I've written a lot of political commentary, sort of taking them to task for whenever there's some sort of hypocrisy at foot. And there are a lot of reasons that's my sort of tack. But one is that when I am in a newsroom or in today's virtual journalistic space, I'm usually the only person who was raised by, people who didn't finish high school. And so I have a class lens that they don't. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'm able to much, in the way that a woman of color would have a lens on racism that I myself don't. And so similarly with discussions of feminism, I was always a little bit, I was very attuned to the ways in which women in more rarefied spaces that I have been fortunate to, move through, might be wearing a shirt that says feminism, but then I'd know something about how they're living their lives. And I'm thinking to myself, that ain't feminist, what you're doing there. And then yet my women in my family who they might have been persuaded by what I myself would consider sort of, you might even call it propaganda, but definitely a weaponization of the term feminist for political mm-hmm. purposes. They might have been persuaded by those efforts, so they're averse to calling themselves a feminist. They would never be wearing that shirt. And yet they're impeccable in not, what to my mind is living feminism. And the way that looked in my family was if there was any situation that did not give them their due respect, within the limitations of a situation, of course, but by and large, if a husband or a boyfriend or a work environment and so on was untenable as a woman, they left. And what I write in the book is that there is actually a sort of paradox of power in that space in class terms, in that there are far fewer, while you might lack the resources to leave those sorts of situations that I'm talking about, in many ways, a middle class or affluent woman might have even more barriers to quitting, divorcing, leaving, and those are shared assets, memberships in civic organizations, a belonging to community, a family reputation to maintain, and so on. Like, the women who raised me didn't have any of those things. They went to work, they raised their children, they were invisible. Nobody cared whether they came and went, and often that allowed them a sort of freedom, augmented by their own courage. But the conversation about who is really a feminist, I think, is a lot more complicated than the way we usually handle it.
Mm-hmm. So that's the part of your book about that act of leaving is so fascinating and memorable and really resonant. And of course, Dolly Parton, the most famous example of her leaving, is leaving the Porter Wagoner show to start her solo career and coming out from under the kind of increasingly oppressive presence of Porter Wagoner on her career, which worked. And she reached wild heights of success, and now she's incredibly wealthy and at the peak of fame. From that peak of wealth and fame, do you think she can still speak for the working class and her origins? If so, how does she?
That is a really important question. And as I also point out in the writing, she's been rich and famous much, much longer than she was invisible and broke in a holler in East Tennessee. But there are a few reasons why, if regardless of what we knew about her life and behind the scenes, and I think that, you can just sniff out authenticity or lack thereof. And the reason that she pulls it off, I think, is for a few reasons. One, she's sort of, here's another paradox about her. She became rich and famous by telling, rather than, feeling ashamed of and turning away from the place that she's from. She just kept telling the story to the place she's from over and over, and she dignified it in a way that so few people had. And also, she's responsible for it's in literally in the billions of dollars of revenue in the state of Tennessee, because that same place that she's from, Pigeon Forge is the closest moderately sized town, and that's where she built this Dollywood tourism empire that very intentionally employs people from that space, people from that place, some of whom are her own family. So then I suppose you could, assert that she's actually now, using in some sort of hollow or insincere way her origins for her own gain, but that doesn't really hold up with what we know about her philanthropy, which is incredible and robust. So I think that somehow she can keep telling those stories, and she can keep being that exemplar of the working class, because at some point, whether it was direct or directly experienced or just sort of happened in a more amorphous way, clearly she decided, I'm not gonna stop dressing like what people call trash. I'm not gonna stop carrying myself the way that I did when I left East Tennessee. I'm not gonna stop talking about the people in that place. And that to me conveys a real commitment and love that must be why she seems like the real deal, even though she's a really, really rich woman.
It's funny. It reminds me a lot of Bruce Springsteen, trading on the origin myth of growing up poor and turning it into this fabulously wealthy empire. And Springsteen has been considered authentic for basically his entire career, but the reputation has only recently come to Dolly Parton. It's like, oh wait, she's authentic and a really interesting writer, even though she's been doing it for years. So I just have probably another example of gender dynamics at play.
For sure. And I'm sure it wouldn't be surprising to know that I'm a huge fan of The Boss. And I hadn't really thought of that comparison, but you're absolutely right. And I'm sure that your analysis of the reasons is correct too.
Okay, well, the book is She Come By It Natural. Of course, I'm going to remind people again to click to get their free copy. I just so highly recommend it. We've got questions queuing up from the audience, so I think we're going to pivot there. Thank you for answering my questions. It was a lot of fun to talk about that stuff.
Thanks, Danny.
All right, so I'm going to go just by order of votes, and we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. This is from Kate. For young girls navigating their place into the world today, what would you point to as the kind of role modeling that Dolly embodies? Asked another way, how do we introduce Dolly to young girls today?
Well, the first way the question was framed, what came to mind for me was something that I assert in the writing is that Dolly Parton is like, and I'm sure there are other women of her generation you can make the same argument for, but for the purposes of our discussion, she's like the original third wave feminist. So she was growing up at a time when, or coming of age at a time when, the women's movement of the 70s was empowering women in certain ways, but there was this conundrum about, well, are you still a feminist if you wear high heels? Are you still a feminist if you wear makeup? And women handled that in different ways as they will. Third wave feminism comes along and it's like, I'm so freed from the shackles of gender performance that I will perform if I want to, and I might even enjoy it and get off on it and make a bunch of money on it. And Dolly Parton admitted that. So not really. Other women deserve similar credit, but she was rare within her generation for taking that approach. And so the first part of the question about like who are the role models now that are sort of maybe in the Dolly vein, I think there are a lot of young, if we want to talk specifically about music, a lot of someone who comes to mind would be Lizzo, for like she's really famous for like body positivity as a large woman, just like presenting herself as a sexual object, but clearly being in control of that presentation, whilst also not, as a Black woman being what is like has been the preferred normative in magazines so there's something really revolutionary about that is very Dolly-esque to me. But as far as then the kind of second piece of like, how do we introduce young women specifically to Dolly? There's a funny story in the book where I was talking to a journalist friend of mine, and he was, for some reason, watching a soccer match with like a young female member of the Hugo Chavez family. And she made the comment, we love this new song called Jolene. And she played on her phone, Miley Cyrus has a cover of Jolene. And my friend, the journalist, was like, no. Like, Dolly admitted that. And then he played the original for them, and their heads were like, phew. So I personally think, when I was a kid, I loved what even then was considered old music. So I think you just go to the source, and, kids are cool. It doesn't have to be Disney-fied by Miley Cyrus. I would just play them the good old stuff.
Mm-hmm. It's what an amazing legacy Jolene has. I'm pretty sure I first was exposed to that song via the White Stripes cover in the early 2000s. And then like, oh my God, why are they singing Dolly Parton? This is so cool. All right,
Yeah.
so I think this next question from Shirley is a question, an important question for anybody writing about celebrities. Has Dolly responded to your book in any way? Has she received a copy?
If there are efforts afoot to get the book into her hands, I'm not aware of them. And no, I have not heard from her. In 2016, when I was applying for the fellowship to do this writing, I did hound her manager quite a bit, and I didn't get an interview. And I since, several years later, just various intersections of my craft, I'm like 2 degrees away in a couple different avenues, but I'm just sort of letting it be, and if the book makes its way to her and I heard from her, of course that would be more than delightful.
Does it make you nervous to think about her reading it?
It doesn't make me nervous, but I did add a note in the acknowledgments that is specifically there in case she reads it. And maybe I would have made this note regardless, just to make the general statement, but it occurred to me, like, I say thank you to her for her presence and culture and all that she represents, and I sort of acknowledge that we're all a person of such iconic status. Inevitably, we're all just like projecting a million things onto that person. So I wanted to kind of acknowledge that, like, this is through my lens, and my lens has to do with class and gender and so on. But I didn't want it to be off-putting in the sense of like imposing a label that is unwanted, that label being feminism. So I just sort of, said, and by the way, this is me doing my thing as a member of the American Free Press and American Letters. But you can call yourself whatever you want, and I respect it.
I have a feeling you might have just answered this question, but this is from Larry. If, when you meet Dolly, what would be the most important thing for you to talk to her about?
I love this question. I've learned that, like, I just like create in the moment. I don't think of an audience. I don't imagine people reading it. I don't even presume that it'll ever be read. So, which would tell you that I have had so many surreal experiences with Heartland, and now with this book, I hadn't thought about that, but I think I'd want to talk to her about my grandma, Betty, who I think of as sort of the star of Heartland. And she does come up several times in this book about Dolly, because they were literally born a few months apart. And my grandmother, who largely raised me, really lived a lot of the tales that Dolly wrote in some of her early and darker songs that were about sort of, the horrors of being a young female, and specifically poor female at that time in the 20th century, be they related to abuse or lack of access to contraception and so on. So I think I'd be like, I am so glad to meet you, Dolly Parton, and I want to talk to you about who we might argue is the real Dolly Parton, my grandma Betty, because she's the one that really ought to get to sit down and have a beer with her.
That's great. I love the affection as a Sarah Smarsh reader. Just every time Grandma Betty comes up, you can see the affection in these books. And can
I throw in there, because I just got off the phone with her recently, and she's such a pain in the ass, because like she doesn't even like books, y'all. I literally dedicated this book to her, and it's like, well, and what are you making for dinner? But that's why she's Grandma Betty. She doesn't care about all this. That's why she's Grandma Betty.
That's perhaps another question is, will Dolly read it, but will Grandma Betty read it either?
Oh, both. Absolutely not. No. No. She'll get a copy. She's very proud. She's proud of me, but she'd rather watch cop shows.
I'm realizing I was so eager to dive into politics and feminism that I never asked, like, where does your personal connection to Dolly begin? What's your story? When did you first encounter her music?
You know, just as any, I think, child of the 80s would recall, that was like her, you know, she's an icon now. In the 80s, she was just part of the fabric of popular culture, not as something that had been, that's now archived, but like in the moment. And you know, she was huge. So like we had, you know, the Dolly and Kenny Christmas album would be on our record player when I was a little kid at the holidays, and you know, little boys on the playground would tell Dolly Parton boob jokes, and she was on talk shows, and she was everywhere. She was on the radio. They don't play her music anymore because of the turn that country radio has taken. But so, but I think the important thing to note in relation to your question is that I wasn't like a Dolly super fan by any means. I didn't really think much about her because she was just like she was like the pop culture water that we swam in. You know, I liked her music. The most poignant, very specific first memory that I have is my grandma had you know, like the tape deck in her car, and we did a lot of highway driving because we lived out in the country, and sometimes we have to go into town for this and that. And my grandma's a very stoic, you know, like Midwestern German Catholic rural woman, and Coat of Many Colors made her cry. She'd cry, and she didn't cry at hardly anything else. Maybe once in a while, a Little House on the Prairie episode. But I was like, wow, there's like something going on with this song. And then of course I ended up on a kind of odyssey of trying to figure out my grandma's life to write a different book. But so I think the first way that she really was on my like budding writer sensitivity radar was as a woman who wrote songs that were capable of making a very strong woman shed tears.
All right, I'm reading the audience questions here. I'm going to add, this is from Terry. Have you watched Ken Burns' documentary Country Music, and did you enjoy it?
I was so stoked when I heard that he had made that doc series. Mm-hmm. And yes, I've watched it. I have mixed feelings. Like, I feel glad that that was made. You know, it was like some serious treatment or regard was given to a genre of music that's often sort of lampooned, or you know, it's the one genre that someone doesn't like. It's a kind of familiar refrain in just, you know, American conversations. So I was glad that somebody attempted it. Now, did I think they got it quite right? As somebody that's sort of like steeped in that culture, no. And you might predict that my number one criticism is that there were way too many dudes.
I asked that question because I knew you had thoughts about it. I had heard you speak of that elsewhere before. And I think I agree. Terry adds that it helped her understand why her mother loved the music so much. So again, the country music as the family kind of glue. All right, I believe this is from Carrie. This is such a challenging year. On a personal level, what do you do to take care of yourself and stay committed and inspired to the world in your work? As someone who's just totally immersed in politics, like, how do you do it? How do you stay sane?
Oh gosh, that is an important question. And, you know, we don't talk enough about, bound up in that question is the vulnerability that we're all experiencing right now. And we should be talking about it. So thank you for that question. And actually, I think I just tweeted last week that, like, it was just before the Trump Biden debate. And I tweeted prior, very presciently, I would add, the worst thing about being a journalist is that I have to watch this debate. So yeah, it is a a lot of people are news junkies in these times, but it's my profession. So, nature and the earth is, and always has been, how I ground myself and return to a kind of centered, peaceful place. I live in a rural area now, so I'm fortunate to have very easy proximity to the healing power of trees and the earth under my feet. Cliche, but that's how I do it.
Well, good. I think it's great. As someone with a toddler that gets very restless inside the house, going outside has been a saving grace for a long time. Okay, I think we're nearing the end, but I think Larry has a really interesting question here, and I think this is an interesting note to end on. Are you familiar with Orville Peck? I can see a lot of similarities to Dolly as far as their music uniting many different and at times at odds groups of people. Do you know Orville Peck?
I do.
Do you think there is something unique to country music as far as the ability to bring divergent groups together?
Wow, what Orville Peck is doing is so interesting. And I don't know if he has more than one album now. I just have the one. Nor do I know if he's yet unmasked. But I think that and sorry, could you repeat that part of the last part of the question? Do I think there's something about the genre?
Something unique to the genre that enables it to bring these divergent groups of people together. Like
okay.
the Brooklyn hipsters liking a dude who's duetted with Shania Twain.
Right. There is something, a lot of people will say, and this came up over and over in the Ken Burns documentary, and he had some great sources and guests. They kept talking about how country music is about storytelling. It's about stories. It's about stories. And I was thinking to myself, like, I mean, that is true, but like there are other genres that are about storytelling. So that didn't quite get it. I think what it is country music is by definition, or at least this is what it is supposed to be or should be. Its hallmark is a lack of pretension. Not only a lack of pretension, but a leaning into, like being, proclaiming a pride about something that is supposed to be shameful. There's some parallels about that in hip hop and rap, to be sure. But that the kind of like signature statement of that genre, it presents a little bit differently. In country music, it's like we have removed. I'll say the way that it presents differently is that rap and hip hop is like undoubtedly cool, and it's been cool for decades, and white people stole a bunch of shit from it, and it's cool. Country music is uncool. I mean, I'm saying this in relative terms, of course. It's cool to me, and it's cool to Brooklyn hipsters, but it's cool to Brooklyn hipsters because it's uncool. You know what I mean? So that provides a there are so many layers at which someone can engage with the genre as a musician. It could be ironically, in which case you're a jerk, but then it could also be like seemingly ironically, but while also actually having genuine regard for the genre. And I would put Jack White and the White Stripes into that category. That dude like genuinely is obsessed with Loretta Lynn. So, and it's like not in any sort of like clunky, ironic, objectifying way. And then of course you've got the people who grew up with it, and so for them it feels like home. Then you've got people that just like the sound. A lot of great country musicians and folk musicians come from. Some of you might know Gillian Welch, who has long sung with the famous banjo player Dave Rawlings. I'm pretty sure she's from somewhere in New England. Some of these folks they're not from like regions or even places that are synonymous with country music, but they're making it. So I think it has this sort of, there's this trope about that it's all like white Republican stuff, but I don't think that's true.
Well, I think that actually is a perfect place to end, because you just demonstrated your ability to take something seemingly simple and dive into the interesting class and political things that are going on beneath. Like a simple dismissal of country music is actually a complicated act. And it's built into stereotypes and class and place. And that's exactly what you do with the book. So the book is She Come By It Natural, Dolly Parton and the Women Who Lived Her Songs. I'll say it one more time. Request a copy of the book by clicking the button at the bottom of the screen. The book comes out Tuesday. Sarah is heading out on tour. I will say from my personal chip on my shoulder that Sarah's book tour is focusing heavily on the Midwest, which we appreciate. So I encourage you to jump on. The Raven has an event. There are plenty of other great stores. So if you want more, make sure to catch Sarah Smarsh on tour for She Come By It Natural. And thank you so much, Sarah. This was wonderful. I really loved it.
Thank you, Danny. And I quickly want to jump in and say, well, first, thank you to Danny and to all the people that organized this event. But also just, and I'm saying this from my heart, it isn't like trying to get in your good graces as somebody that's peddling books. You all are doing like really important work right now in a democracy that's on fire, in that you are connecting people with stories, but also like, you know, information that is not, we are learning, a given in a society, even a seemingly free society. I was thinking recently, like, there are so many things that are threatened right now, but our freedom is still alive in our books. You know what I mean? And you all are part of that ecosystem, and I thank you on behalf of authors.
Thank you for saying that. Okay. Well, Carrie, do you have anything to add? Here she is.
Nope. I think that we are good. I can't follow up on Sarah's words with anything that's more poignant than what you just said. So thank you, Sarah. Everybody go out and read the book and make a bunch of noise about it. Talk to your friends and family about it and buy it for some friends for Christmas. And also, of course, go out and vote. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.